Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today in our discussion of career routes within the communications field. I'm Charlie Havens, the president of the Xi Chi chapter of Lambda Pi Eta here at the College of Charleston. Before we begin, I would like to remind you that any questions you have can be submitted through the chat feature. We definitely want to make sure your questions are answered today, so please don't hesitate to send any questions you might have. I'm very excited to introduce you to our host from the Advisory Council. First, I'd like to introduce you to the Council Chair, T.R. Straub. In addition to his role as the Executive Director for Russell Reynolds Associates, he also co-leads the firm's corporate affairs and diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. He also has a role on the firm's social justice practice, and at Russell Reynolds Associates, he focuses on searches in government relations, corporate communications, and public affairs, and leads DEI consulting engagements. He previously worked for Heyman Associates and prior to that, Teach for America. I'm also so excited to welcome Patty Tucker. At Patty's consulting agency, Treehouse Counsel LLC, she provides high-level strategy for companies lacking best practice corporate communications or specific event experience. Patty develops strategic plans and programs for positioning, employer of choice, and competitive growth challenges. Prior to Treehouse Counsel, Patty has worked in many fields, which includes her amazing work building a $7 million corporate business-to-business and crisis practice from scratch at Edelman. Thank you both so much for joining us. Before we begin, is there anything I left out that you would like to share?
No, you made me sound more impressive than I am, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Amen.
So I guess a first question to kick off with is a lot of students, especially ones who are about to graduate, are looking into more non-traditional communications fields. So things like social media work and journalism and things of that nature. And I was wondering if you had any insights you could share about how the communications field has changed and how they might get their foot in the door in something a little less traditional.
I'm happy to start. And so Charlie, I love that question. And I love the framing of it, although I might tweak it a little bit to say that some of the non-traditional elements related to social digital communications, journalism are increasingly traditional. I think that being able to think about the full suite of tools in your communications toolkit, whether you sort of skew towards marketing and branding or have the journalistic foundation or are leaning into social and digital communications. I think increasingly in the more senior you get in your career, you're expected to have a variety of those pieces of the puzzle at your disposal. And so I really would think about all of those things currently being traditional, if you use tradition in the current, in the current state, although that certainly would not have been the case 10, 20 years ago. So yeah.
I would add, I echo what TR said about what's considered traditional and not, because everything's evolving. I guess my initial and main thought is right now to match your interests with COVID trends, right? So agencies, some are hiring, but not as much as normal. Companies are hiring more. When you look at who needs to be communicating and what the communications trends are writ large, you're seeing any business that's going through change needs to be communicating that change. So most business, well, let's say all businesses are having to adjust and change right now, right? So many are needing to communicate change out to their customer base, and most are having to develop some new muscles to communicate with their employee base that's now remote. So those are hot areas. Environmental's very strong. As far as public interest, when you look, so I guess my headline, and we can get into details to the degree anyone wants to, is apply your area of interest and skills to what's hot right now, and you're going to have a greater chance of getting traction.
Thank you. We just got a question from Sierra Wall, so I'll just read it out loud. For me personally, I want to do something more for music or the arts, but within the communications major. Either a music journalist or something of the sort, but I have minors in Asian studies and arts management. What would you recommend? And thank you for your question, Sierra.
You want to take it first, TR?
Yeah, I mean, I think to Patty's point about this moment, I think that arts and cultural institutions are really struggling right now. And I think are struggling to clearly articulate their mission and purpose in a moment where people are focused on their fundamental needs and just thinking about Maslow's hierarchy. Like the engagement with the arts and culture tends to be a little bit of an afterthought right now, where a lot of people are in a moment of crisis. And I think that just presents a real opportunity to support that space if that really is an area that you have passion for. I think that if you're interested in journalism, there are, I mean, increasingly there is less and less specialization and just like focusing on one specific area. And so if you were to go down that route, you might have to look at a broader portfolio and cover a number of different issues and have that be one of your beats. I think the other thing that you could consider, especially in a moment now where so many of these institutions are struggling financially, is how you weave together communications and development / fundraising, knowing that that is something that is just fundamentally bottom line critical to organizations right now where there's a real need. And so if you were thinking about maybe internship opportunities, I think that's where a lot of organizations are focusing their time, just trying to keep their organizations afloat, especially if they're not in a position to have people come actually walk through their front doors.
I would totally agree. That's a field that's really, really hurting right now. It'll take a while to recover. But having said that, I love graduates who have intentionality with their path, but I beg you not to hang on too tightly. Your first job might not read like your dream job. And by the way, if you got what you thought would be a dream job, you might not love it. So be open to a path. So if arts are your big passion and you hope for a career in communications in the arts, look at a pathway. Maybe your first job is in a nonprofit or in a role that's doing communications in another milieu, and you volunteer your time to do comms for an arts organization, or volunteer your time to do reporting for a local publication around the arts. You can patch together your growth and experience in a mix of your paid and getting yourself on a volunteer position. I fell into it by accident, but I got on an advisory board at 22, I think. Way too young. I had no idea how to behave. But older sponsor brought me on and said, "I'll teach you how to behave. We need someone who will do PR for us." I'm like, well, I could do that all day. So I fell into that by accident, but realized that if you volunteer your services, you'll be welcome with open arms at many, many places, regarding whether it's arts or sports or whatever your interests are.
Our next question is from Eternity, who asked, where do you see the broadcasting industry going in the next few years, and how do you suggest breaking into it?
Patty, you want to start?
I'll let you. I defer to you. You're the professional in recruiting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that so I would broaden the thought about broadcast into content as well. I mean, I think most of the folks that I talk to in the broadcast industry are either thinking about how to leave the industry or thinking about how to diversify their skill set and think about digital content, both production and distribution, knowing that broadcast is increasingly across all different types of platforms. I mean, think about, like, of course, traditional, but then streaming, other digital. And so I would broaden the purview to think about the content piece of this. How do you, and both from a linguistic standpoint, but also graphic design, video, other digital, because I think that's going to serve you well as that space continues to evolve and do so at a pretty rapid clip.
I agree. I would have steered you to content creation if not. I mean, we're not shutting you down, neither of us. There are still broadcast stations and they need talent, and you could learn so much in an entry-level job there. they're just hurting for revenue, which means they're hurting for hires. So keep your eye open for them, but then you also might end up on the video production side of a heavy content creation team or something like that, which would be, again, building your resume toward that should it get healthier in the future.
Thank you. So our next question is from Sydney. Considering the climate of the world right now, what advice would you give to someone who wants to grow their resume in their last semester of college, but is struggling to find an internship due to the current circumstances? What are other things that can be impressive to employers that are not necessarily internships? And I think this is such a great question.
I'm unmuted, so I'll go first, TR, if you want.
That was strategic. Go for it.
I see you. Okay. Thing one, you might, if you have the luxury of doing what you can, thing one is if you're working a job to pay some bills, work to gain experience there so that you can express how you learn to manage or work on a team or understand an office dynamic. So make the most of what you've got. If you have the luxury, offer yourself up. My first internship, I literally walked into a firm and said, I'll work for free for you this summer if you tell me, if you can put together a really strong work, product for me. If you can use me well, I'll work for you for free. So I talked myself into a free internship because I was in a small market at the time, and there's only one company doing a paid internship. So you can volunteer for a firm or a nonprofit and get some experience there in your senior year. Especially now since we're all remote, you might offer to do some writing remotely for people who need content. Any of that shows your energy and lets you stretch your skills and convey that to your next, post-graduation interviews.
I'd agree wholeheartedly. And I think would add that even if you're let's say you're involved in a campus organization, and even if it is virtually, whatever it looks like taking on some of those communications and marketing responsibilities for the organization, so you have a product to point to that you're proud of and you can add to your portfolio. Or even if you're just, for me, I waited tables all through college, right? And so if I was a communications person, I might say to that local restaurant, hey, can I help you do some of your promotional work? Can I manage your social and digital media? Can I do manage your Facebook page, manage your Twitter feed, whatever it might be, which hopefully wouldn't be a huge time commitment, but you can add that to your resume and also have that boss be a reference for you. And I find it hard to believe that any organization right now that is, again, trying to stay afloat is going to turn down that sort of assistance. Now, it depends upon how much time you have to give and also what your financial means are to do some of that versus getting another job and working on the side. But if it's something you can weave into the work you're already doing and already getting paid for, if you don't have the luxury of taking an unpaid internship, I think that's another potential way to think about that.
Or even just real quick, I didn't even mean to. I just fell into this when I was a young professional. I took some photography classes for fun and loved them, but I really couldn't afford to keep going with it. And I thought about it and looked around the room and realized it's not costing them to have me sit in the classroom. So I approached the owner and said, what if I do some PR for the business? Will you let me take classes for free? Yep. So I got experience. I wrote up some press releases. I pitched some media. I got them some coverage, and they let me, continue classes. So but that was just a little bit of time. To TR's point, you might not have a lot of time. If there's someone you already have a relationship with in another way, maybe you can volunteer some content creation or writing or PR for them.
Thank you so much. The next question is somewhat similar, but I feel like there could be more to discuss. From Megan, what is your advice on standing out when applying for jobs in the post-COVID era? What would stand out to you in an application, especially since she feels like her interests and skills align with so many other people entering the job market? So trying to separate herself from the competition, basically.
Such a great question. Professional TR, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think that so I think part of it is making sure that you're tailoring your approach to the actual organization. So like when I get a cover letter or an email and it's clear that it's the same note that they've used for every other organization, it shows me that they're not specifically interested in this, which is hard, right? If you really are just applying to anything because you really want a job, that's entirely fair. But I think taking the extra couple of minutes to tailor your response, even if it's just the initial paragraph to that note, goes a long way. I think the other thing too is that you can be really clear about what about your background and experience and what you've done is relevant to what you would do in that role, so that you're kind of painting the picture for that organization so that you do then stand out. And the other thing too is that I think I'm a big believer in the fact that you have nothing to lose. And so if you apply through the approved formal channels for a role, like connect with the hiring manager on LinkedIn or send them a note, or connect with someone else that has a connection to the organization and say, I would love to hear your perspective on what it's like to work there, so that your name then starts to register and you're top of mind there. And worst case scenario, like they think you're a little bit of a nuisance and they don't hire you for the job, which is sort of like no skin off your back at that point. So, and I think it's also just good practice to make cold asks, contact people. The more you do it, the more comfortable you get with it. I was inherently uncomfortable with it and hated doing that. And now my job is essentially picking up the phone and calling people I don't know every day. And it's still it's not like my favorite thing in the world, but it's something that I've become more comfortable doing.
Yeah, we could talk. That's a very good question. We could talk hours on this. You must stand out. You have to know your resume. It looks like 100 others. So yes, to your first paragraph has to catch their attention. Your first short paragraph. I cannot stress enough that you need to research the company hard and have your first paragraph prove that you did. Make some observation that you picked up. Look at their website, look at their Glassdoor, look at what people have said, what awards they've won. If it's a public company, pull up the annual report, which you're like, what? The first page of it will be a letter written in English by someone actually with your degree, talking about what happened with the company in the past year and where the company's going in the future. It's in English, you can read it, and then allude to something out of that research that's authentic to you, to say, I know the company is working through the CEO's 3-point plan of growth, or I know you're struggling to enter into new territory, or I see on Glassdoor that you've been hiring a lot. Prove to them that you have researched them well. And already that tells them that it's just not a form letter. And stay in touch with them. Do diligent follow-ups. Don't ask them for things, but send them things of value, maybe an article. If you are building a relationship with someone, just, be extra cheerful and don't ask things of them, but weigh in, frequently, not don't harass them, but you have to get out of your comfort zone.
So the next question is from McKinley, who asked, COVID and internships were mentioned. Do you think firms are going to take into account the disadvantage upperclassmen are experiencing with not being able to have traditional internships or internships at all? How should we navigate this difficulty?
Yeah, I think that organizations will keep it in mind. I also think they're going to want to see how you've been creative and resilient. I'll say even for senior level executives, there's a lot of people that are very talented, very well thought of, that are out of work right now for no fault of their own. And we have to be mindful about that. But then organizations also want to know what they're doing to keep their skills fresh and stay connected to the market and to their own networks through a period of unemployment. And I think the same is true for you. And so I would just say, you need to demonstrate that you're working, that you're trying, that you're picking up new skills, so that when they say, I know it's been really hard to get an internship and you didn't have one over the past 6 months, what did you do instead? That you don't just say, I didn't, nothing. The environment's been really hard.
Amen.
So our next question is from Patty from Dr. Goodyear. You mentioned having a sponsor who brought you onto that advisory council. Can you talk a little bit more about how you cultivate a relationship with a mentor or sponsor, especially if you aren't currently in a formal position?
Ooh, that's a good question. Volunteerism. I mean, okay, a couple things. If you're volunteering someone, making it known to the I was going to say grown-ups, but all the people you're interacting with, sometimes you can get terrific sponsorship by someone just a few years older than you. So don't just think they have to have gray hair to be valuable to you. But being valuable to others, frankly, is the best way, right? That mentor in specific, I worked on a committee underneath him, and I did grunt work for the advertising awards in Atlanta. And when he headed the charge. And then he sat on this board and said, I know someone who can do PR. And there it was. So being valuable, making yourself known, asking questions, asking for advocacy, not in a pesky way, but hey, I'm looking to be engaged. If you know anyone who could use me, just to stay top of mind, are some of the top things I would say. Beth? TR probably has ideas too. You got a thumbs up.
So our next question is also from Megan, and she was asking, what are some things that we can add to our portfolio if we don't have much professional work to show our employers?
Do people still use portfolios, TR? I mean, they do, but I would say, TR looks frozen. I would say you can pull in some writing from class. You can start your own blog, even if no one reads it, other than your potential employer. You can, they don't want to look at a whole lot. I would, at this level, they know you don't have years of work. They will be open to classwork, but they'll need to know that you have picked up skills in other ways too. Hopefully that's helpful. I think
Sorry about that. My computer's froze, but I'm back.
I like it. Now you're in dual. You're in the frozen TR and the moving TR. Ah, phooey. Now you're just one.
I'm dealing with rural in-law Wi-Fi right now. Rolling with the punches. It's another lesson here.
The question had been around what to put in your portfolio if you don't have a lot of writing experience. So I don't know if you want to weigh in or if we move on.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have a lot of writing experience, I would say one, write more to include it in your portfolio, and two, figure out, I mean, I saw another question about like photography, content, graphic design. Like, I think the more that you can do that is representative of your skill sets and interests, and figuring out just like how to start generating content, and not just for the sake of like putting stuff out there, but actually making it aligned with your interests and what you're good at, so that it reinforces your resume, reinforces your LinkedIn profile, that it's all linked together. I would say it's just important to keep doing it so that you're continuing to refine your skills. And two, I mean, if you are, and I know I'm sort of getting ahead of myself in the chat box, but if you are really interested in graphic design or video or visual content, like, do not put together an ugly resume. That is like the easiest way to get ruled out for a job. And the same thing if you're like, if you don't have a consistently formatted resume, or your grammar is off and you're saying that you love writing, that is a real problem. And so I would pay a lot of attention to making sure that your LinkedIn, all of your social platforms are all a positive representation of who you are and what you want people to see of you. And I, even just as like a gut check, I went on Facebook while we were sitting here a few minutes ago and just typed in a couple of your names, and some of you have pretty openly available digital footprints and some things that you might not want an employer to see. So I would lock some of that stuff down.
So to be mindful of time, I think we have one last question, and this is a pretty good one to wrap up the conversation with. Dr. Kaufman wrote and asked, comm majors are aware of career possibilities in PR, journalism, and social media. What are other types of careers a graduate with a communication degree can pursue?
I love this question.
Yeah, go.
I mean, I'll just say, I mean, I think like I do work in the broad corporate affairs portfolio. And so anything like under communications, including internal communications, employee communications, which I would say is a really hot area right now. It may have been the redheaded stepchild of the function. But if anything has changed this year, it is that employee communications is more critical. I also think a really natural offshoot of that is employee engagement, all things human resources, and then diversity, equity, and inclusion also starts to fit into that puzzle. And we're on the external engagement side. I think government affairs, policy, advocacy, grassroots work, corporate social responsibility, sustainability, all of those are increasingly critical. And I think that communications can be the sort of like core that you build off of. And then if you wanted to go down a marketing route, if you wanted to go down more of a data and analytics route in support of some of the functional work, I think those things are all really practical and relevant.
I couldn't have said it better. Every business, now small businesses can't afford it so much, but businesses are investing more in communications to, like I said earlier, communicate their changes. So their PR, their marketing, their employee engagement departments are often wanting a good entry-level producer, content creator. So you can follow your heart and look at firms in that kind of field, or just what's near you or where you have a relationship. Government is still funded. I know that isn't very interesting, but there's some beautiful, my daughter's a College of Charleston graduate spring before last and got a job with the county in public, thank you, in public health, but the government is still funded. It's Health and Human Services, and they're not, yes, of course they have economic impacts, but they're not as wavering with the economy, come and go. The issues field, non-governmental organizations and issues are a real growth area, and they all need communications. They are all about communications, so. Everybody needs comms right now, y'all. Not everyone's hiring, but everyone needs comms.
Patty and TR, thank you so much. I can speak for everyone when I say this was really helpful and really important and great information. And for those of you who have not had your questions answered yet, we will be passing along all of your questions to them, and they will be able to answer them through the Department of Communications. So thank you again for joining us. This was incredible.
And thank you for your expert facilitation, Charlie. I appreciate you keeping Patty in line. She's usually really hard to wrangle in these settings.
I'm really shy and quiet. So
thank you for cracking out of your shell for us, Patty.
I try.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate you being here.
Bye.